Welcome back everyone to a very special showcase video. Something that you may not be aware of is that nether trees actually generate in 4 distinct zones, and some of these areas tend to have considerably more shroomlights than others. So what if we strategically place pistons in areas that will harvest the most shroomlights possible? Well, that was the initial goal I set out to accomplish around 2 months ago, and today I'll show you not only all the intricacies of this farm, but also how the unique generation of huge fungus allowed me to make the fastest shroomlight farm in the game. To fully grasp how this mechanic works, we must first take a quick dive into just how exactly nether trees generate. We begin with the fungus itself. Once it has been successfully grown on top of the correct variant of Nylium, the trunk height is found. This height can range anywhere from 4 to 13 blocks, and then there's a further 1 in 12 chance that this height is doubled, meaning that the shortest nether tree you can get is 4 blocks and the tallest is 26. Next up is generating the hat of the nether tree. What is a hat, you may ask? Well, I like to think of it as the literal wide-brimmed hat that just sits on top of the trunk, but you might like to think of it as just the leaves of the nether tree, where all the wartblocks and shroomlights spawn. The height of this hat is found by taking the lowest value between the height of the nether tree and a randomly generated number. This means that if the smallest number between the two values is the height of the tree, then the wartblocks from the hat can actually touch the floor, which is pretty cool. Okay, so now that we've generated the basic size of the nether tree, we can work on forming its iconic shape. To create this, a huge fungus is generated layer by layer, where each layer has its own radius. To determine the radius of each layer, the game compares the current height of the layer that it's generating to the total height of the hat. And depending on both the current height and a randomly generated number, the radius will be either 1 or 2 blocks. Now for trees that have a hat height greater than 8 blocks, the bottom 4 layers of that will have a radius of 3. After one layer is constructed, we move up to the next layer, and so on and so forth until we reach just above the height of the trunk, where one extra layer is formed. Great, we've just built our very first huge fungus, but it's looking kind of bland because it's still just a trunk and we haven't worked out whether to generate shroomlights or wartblocks at each point yet. So this part of the generation is a process that we fungus farmers are most interested in, as it determines where certain types of blocks are generated most often. The 4 regions of the hat are the internal, external, corners, and last and most certainly least, vines. As you may have deduced from that list, the internal region is the one that I have utilised for the shroomlight farm here, as there's a whopping 10% chance of a shroomlight generating per block, compared to let's say the external region, where there's only a 0.05% chance of them generating. This discrepancy is what not only makes a shroomlight orientated farm feasible, but also a dedicated wartblock farm that harvests the external region of wartblocks, where they have a 98% chance of generating as opposed to a 20% chance in the internal region. And that's basically it. If you would like a more detailed explanation of this with code snippets, then I'd highly recommend checking out the write-up I did on huge fungus generation, which is linked in the description below. Okay, so now that we've discussed the basic principle that all shroomlight farms use, let's have a closer look at how the core of this farm harvests up to 15,000 shroomlights per hour. As we aren't concerned with how many stems we're getting, we can sacrifice a layer of the trunk and have a 4th dispenser instead. This increases the number of trees produced an hour by 1,500 and results in around an extra 1,000 shroomlights in total. To extract the stems as fast as possible, we've got this little 0 tick set up here which cycles every 4 game ticks, allowing the player to place down fungus in sync with the speed of the dispensers. And to keep the Nylium from dying, I'm using this pulse extender based system here that will keep this torch depowered as long as the block stream is continually flowing. So when the Nylium does die, the stream will stop and the pulse extender will switch off, hence activating this torch and the dispenser, replenishing the Nylium. As explained earlier, shroomlights mainly grow in this ring around the trunk, so that is exactly where we're going to be placing our pistons. An additional optimization step we're taking here is only harvesting the layers 4 to 13, as 90% of the trees grow to 13 blocks high, and harvesting any lower won't yield any extra shroomlights as that is the vine range, and harvesting any higher will yield noticeable diminishing returns. You might have noticed that I've also placed some pistons on the edge here which aren't really harvesting the shroomlight region. I purposefully did this to increase the self-sustainability of the farm, as these pistons harvest the corners of the nether tree where you will get a lot more wartblocks that can then be composted into Bonemeal. Plus this region still harvests a couple more shroomlights compared to the external region. Half the farm doesn't even require a complex array of pistons to process all the blocks. Instead, the wall of warts are directly pushed into an advanced staggered blast chamber system that I'll touch on later in the video. And as for the other side of the farm, well, we got a couple of columns of pistons here that are being 0 ticked 1 game tick before the pistons before them fire, so that the block stream moves unimpeded at 4 game ticks. Block streams are then pushed into a slim blast chamber so that there's a one wide air gap between the block stream and the wall. This allows for any items that spawn from blown up blocks to exit from both the left and the right sides of the block stream, as opposed to just one side. Now, the stem block streams are processed a little bit differently. To mitigate the need for zero-ticking the block stream every time it changes direction, which is a lot, I split it into two 8-game tick block streams, which can then run with a simple glass mechanic, where the observers can detect the glass changing shape as blocks move past it. Another trick that every blast chamber should really be using is the fact that blowing up a block as it's moving reduces its blast resistance down to that of slime, therefore increasing the effectiveness of each TNT. The main piece of tech that makes this farm work so efficiently are these custom-made Block 36 TNT dupers. If you have no idea what words just came out of my mouth just then, don't worry, because I'm just about to explain it. The basic principle of these dupers is that it traps TNT inside of a block, such as basalt or cobblestone, reducing the damage it does to items. And then, just as the TNT is about to detonate, the block turns itself into a Block 36, reducing its blast resistance, meaning that the blast power of the TNT isn't impacted. So essentially, what we have here is a TNT that takes 5 shots to kill one item while still blowing up as many blocks as usual. This mechanic was discovered by the Chinese technical Minecrafter, Dula de Gulu. Now, this system here works great for when you just need to detonate the TNT a couple of blocks away from the duper, but for further distances, some additional trickery is needed. For this module in particular, the TNT needs to detonate precisely in this location, otherwise the two TNT dupers will become overrun with blocks from the core. In order to get the TNT out next to block, an additional cobblestone is generated. This more heavy-duty system is actually quite similar to the one I'm going to use in my ncore nether tree farm, except this is optimized for speed as it can run every 30 game ticks as opposed to every 50. So that's just the dupers. The real fun starts when working out how to process a 5x5x10 area of blocks every second. That's 250. This problem gave me quite a lot of grief and took me a solid 20-minute brainstorming session in the shower to figure out what to do with all these blocks. I utilized a trick that I've never really seen before, and it's actually quite simple. So instead of splitting up the block stream into two separate halves like you usually would with pistons, you blow up the lower half first with TNT, and then use all 12 blocks of the piston push limit to extend the top half as far away from the first TNT as possible, so that the items from the top don't land on the bottom. Another thing to keep in mind is that any items within an 8 block radius of the TNT are going to take 1 damage, and as most of the items exiting the blast chamber are only on 1 to 2 health, it's imperative that any item streams are situated outside of this 8 block radius. That explains why we drop the items down so low here, and why this item stream kind of curves around the edge weirdly. That's basically all the tricky stuff out of the way. The rest of the farm is just item processing, and once the items leave the blast chamber, they're sent along these water streams to the stone cutter, where the items all stack up into groups of 64, so they're easier to handle for the hoppers. Then an array of 6x Shulker Box Loaders filters out the minority items from the farm, such as cobble, basalt, and stems, and an additional loader is used to filter out all the Shroomlights. This leaves just 260,000 warp blocks an hour to be converted into Bonemeal inside of this 2x Composter Array. The Bonemeal is then spat out and sent to yet another 6x Box Loader for either further storage or to be injected back into the farm to provide up to 32,000 Bonemeal an hour. All the items collected from this farm are stored in shulker boxes in this area down here. The farm makes 14,300 Shroomlights an hour, 15,600 stems an hour, around 5,000 cobble, and around 7,000 basalt. To get this farm working automatically, you'll need to supply it with fungus and bonemeal. By computing the simple binomial distribution for fungus growth probability, you can find that 4 dispensers will have an 87% chance of growing a fungus each cycle, resulting in approximately 15,667.2 trees an hour, meaning the player will need at least 15,668 fungus an hour to keep the farm operating at 100% all the time. In knowing all this, I just completely oversaturate the player with a fungus system that gives them 18,000 fungus an hour, and then any leftover fungus can either be composted or stored for future use. If you need help with the item filters, check out the world download or join the Storage Check Discord. As you enter the farm, you'll notice a fungus selection panel which essentially determines what type of tree you'll be growing. This barely matters as the farm composts the warp blocks, so the only difference between the two is that you'll get different log types, and the warped version will produce slightly more bonemeal an hour, as it doesn't generate any weeping vines. Now, this farm is a bit of a big fella, and once you turn it on at this lamp, it requires around 7 seconds to warm up. I implemented a heap of safety features to make it extremely difficult to operate this incorrectly, like it's probably green proof. One of these features disables fungus growth for 7 seconds after turning on the farm, as otherwise if you were to place down fungus as soon as you turned on the farm, you would actually grow enough trees to completely clog the blast chamber, and hence the TNT dupers, trapping any dupe TNT and blowing up the farm, which wouldn't be too good. You'll know you're able to start planting down fungus as this indicator light will switch on. To input fungus, just chuck in shulker boxes of fungus into their respective chests, or you can connect a fungus farm straight to the water stream and switch it on or off with the Shroomlight farm. I recommend making this mod-based continuous fungus farm if you're playing in 1.19, as it's both the fastest and simplest possible design you can make, and you can find a link to it in the description below. Bonemeal input is just around the back, and I made sure to leave just enough space here to allow external input of bonemeal boxes from something like Dark's Moss Farm, or you can just manually throw in boxes. Although be warned, this farm does use 4 boxes of bonemeal an hour, so yeah. Well, that's pretty much it. This project actually took around twice as long to finish as I thought it would, as I kept thinking of new ways to orientate the TNT dupers and increase efficiency in various ways. And to be honest, I kinda got carried away in adding a bunch of smart safety features and item processing bits like the composting system. This farm isn't really an all-in-one farm, but funnily enough, even though it only harvests 1 stem block per tree, it's still faster than a couple popular designs I've seen on YouTube. Anyways, enough silly business. If you're gonna have a go at making this yourself, I highly recommend downloading the schematic of this farm linked in the description, or grabbing a world download from the huge Fungus Discord, where you can also get help with your farm in case anything goes wrong. Additional info on how this farm works can be found there, as well as a heap of other resources on Nether tree farming. For those who don't know, this is the second video of the Nether tree farming carnival, which is a stupid little thing I'm doing where I'm attempting to finish off a bunch of Nether tree farming concepts that I've developed over the past 20 months or so, and publish them all by the end of the year. The first vid of this series is a really impressive all-rounder Nether tree farm made by Krebs, which you can check out in the description below. And that's all. Thanks for watching and have a great day.